La'an found proof that Nurse Chapel broke the law, falsified records, covered up a treaty violation, a court-martial offense sitting right in front of her. She never reported it. Not because she didn't care, because 2 episodes ago, this exact same woman stopped trusting her own judgment about herself. And this episode is the moment that distrust gets tested against a completely different kind of instinct. By the end of this video, you'll see why La'an letting Chapel walk isn't a throwaway subplot buried under a flashier Klingon noir story. It's the clearest evidence yet that whatever's happening to La'an this season isn't just about fear. It's about what she chooses to do with power she's not sure she can trust anymore. Quick grounding before this theory makes sense. A case of chiaroscuro is built around Una, Megenga, and Uhura's black and white Casablanca-style mission into Klingon-occupied space. But running underneath that main story is a much quieter B-plot back on the Enterprise. La'an starts investigating something and finds proof that Chapel falsified Starfleet records to hide a treaty violation. She confronts Chapel directly. She gets the truth, and then she does nothing with it. No report, no consequences, just a quiet decision to let it go. That's a genuinely strange choice for a character whose entire identity has been built around rigid discipline, protocol, and control. La'an doesn't bend rules. She's the one who enforces them. So the real question this subplot is asking isn't, was Chapel wrong to cover it up? It's, why did La'an, of all people, decide not to do anything about it? The instinct that got punished 2 episodes ago. Go back to the Griffin Incident, because that's where this theory actually starts. That episode gave La'an a confrontation built entirely around her deepest fear, that her augment inheritance, the same genetic legacy that produced Khan, might be reactivating inside her. The Griffin's presence took the form of Rose Harper, a mass-murdering security officer, specifically to weaponize that fear. By the end, La'an told herself she was home and vanished into an unexplained void. Whatever that meant, it left her rattled enough that by this episode, she's explicitly described as someone who no longer trusts her own instincts. Not her combat instincts, not her judgment, none of it. That's the emotional starting point for chiaroscuro, a character who has spent this entire season slowly losing confidence in whether her own gut reactions can be trusted. Because the last time she leaned into instinct, it led somewhere she couldn't fully explain or control. The detective plot that quietly answers the Griffin's question. Here's what makes this B-plot so much more important than its screen time suggests. La'an spends this episode functioning as a detective, tracking down inconsistencies, following a thread, using the exact kind of sharp, disciplined instinct that's defined her character since the pilot. And her instincts are completely correct. Chapel really did falsify records. She really did hide a treaty violation. Every hunch La'an follows lands exactly where it should. That matters enormously against the backdrop of the Griffin. 2 episodes ago, the show planted real doubt about whether La'an's instincts could be trusted anymore. Whether the thing driving her judgment might be corrupted by whatever's reactivating in her DNA. This episode quietly answers that question with evidence, not reassurance. Her instincts weren't broken. They were never the problem. What she does with what those instincts find her, that's the actual question the show is now asking. Why letting Chapel go is the real twist, not a plot hole. The most common criticism of this subplot online is that it lets Chapel off too easily. A court-martial offense treated with almost no consequence, Pike barely reacting, the show seemingly uninterested in the legal stakes it raised. That criticism makes sense if you're watching this as a plot about Chapel. It stops making sense the moment you realize the plot isn't really about Chapel at all. It's about La'an choosing deliberately not to use power she has every legitimate right to use. That's a genuinely different kind of test than the one the Griffin gave her. The Griffin tested whether La'an could resist becoming violent, becoming Khan, becoming the version of herself everyone fears she might turn into. This episode tests something quieter and, in some ways, more revealing. Whether she can hold real leverage over someone, the ability to end a colleague's career with total legal justification, and choose mercy instead of control. Khan's entire legacy is defined by seizing power and using it without restraint. La'an just demonstrated, in the smallest possible stakes imaginable, that she can hold power over another person and deliberately choose not to wield it. The parallel the show is drawing without saying it out loud, Look at what's happening simultaneously in the A-plot, because the show is clearly building a thematic rhyme even if it never states it directly. Una spends this entire episode navigating a world of moral gray, pretending to be someone she isn't, working with a resistance whose methods aren't always clean, ultimately manipulating a man's death to serve a larger cause. By the end, she asks Megha outright whether she made the right decision. His answer, very few things in life are black and white. La'an's arc runs the same experiment at a completely different scale. Where Una operates in a war zone with life and death stakes, La'an operates in a hallway on the Enterprise with a colleague's career on the line. Both women end this episode having found the truth, and both discover that finding the truth is the easy part. Deciding what to actually do with it is the part that resists a clean black and white answer. The episode's literal visual gimmick, shooting Una's story in black and white specifically to represent moral clarity dissolving into gray, extends thematically into La'an's story even though her scenes weren't filmed the same way. Two characters, one lesson, delivered at two completely different volumes. Why this specific test matters more for La'an than it would for anyone else on the crew. Any character on this ship choosing mercy over strict protocol would be a nice character beat. For La'an, specifically, it's closer to a referendum on this whole season's central question. She spent 4 episodes now oscillating between evidence that her augment nature might be resurfacing, unexplained strength, a fear she can't name, a presence that called itself home, and no clear answer about what that resurfacing would actually mean if it happened. Khan's defining trait wasn't just strength or intelligence. It was the belief that having power over others justified using it completely, without restraint, without mercy. La'an, holding real power over Chapel in this episode, and choosing restraint instead of control, is the first genuinely clean piece of evidence this season that whatever's reactivating in her DNA hasn't touched the part of her that decides how power gets used. That's a meaningfully different kind of proof than she didn't lose her temper or she didn't hurt anyone. It's proof that even holding leverage that would let her control someone else's fate entirely, her first instinct was mercy, not domination. The strongest opposing read here is that this subplot isn't really about La'an's augment arc at all. It's simply weak writing, exactly as critics have flagged. Under that reading, the show wanted a low-stakes B-plot to run parallel to Una's flashier main story, didn't want to deal with the actual legal consequences of Chapel's crime, and resolved it quickly and quietly, because following through on a court-martial subplot would have derailed the episode's noir aesthetic and pacing. Under that interpretation, La'an letting Chapel go isn't a deliberate character statement. It's the show taking the path of least narrative resistance. That's a legitimate read, and the criticism about Pike's total lack of reaction is a fair point that this theory doesn't fully explain away. If the show wanted this to land as a clear, intentional character beat, La'an, specifically, giving Pike some acknowledgement of the stakes involved, would have strengthened that reading considerably. His near-total absence from the consequences does weaken the case that this was meticulously planned as augment arc payoff, rather than convenient plotting. But even granting that the surrounding subplot may be underbaked, it doesn't fully undercut what La'an specifically does within it. Whether or not the writers fully thought through Chapel's legal exposure, the choice they gave La'an, real power, real justification to use it, and a decision to hold back anyway, still lines up too precisely with the season's ongoing Khan legacy question to read as pure coincidence. The core claim that La'an's restraint with Chapel functions as evidence, her judgment about the use of power remains intact, despite her reactivating augment traits, is well supported by the season's established pattern. The Griffin planting the doubt, this episode's detective plot confirming her instincts were never the problem, and the specific nature of the test tracking directly against Khan's defining trait of unrestrained power. The Una/La'an thematic parallel is also clearly intentional based on M'Benga's explicit dialogue. What keeps this from strong confidence is the subplot's weak execution, openly criticized by reviewers. Pike's total non-reaction and the lack of any stated consequence make it hard to confirm the writers intended this as deliberate, season-long arc building rather than a rushed B-plot that happens to align thematically by coincidence. Until a future episode explicitly references this moment or ties it back to La'an's augment arc directly, this remains a strong, pattern-based theory, rather than a confirmed piece of the season's design. So here's what to watch for heading into the rest of the season. Does the show ever bring this moment back? Does Chapel's cover-up resurface later, forcing La'an to reckon with the choice she made here under different stakes? And does La'an's restraint in this small moment get tested again at a much larger scale, the way Una's choices in Klingon space clearly cost something real? If this season really is building toward La'an, confronting what she's capable of before the series ends, this quiet hallway confrontation with Chapel might end up mattering more than the flashier horror episode confrontation that came before it. Because this time, nobody was watching her decide who she wants to be. She decided anyway,